Hello everyone, welcome back to another video. I have a slight change of pace today. I will be talking to Sam Nezirovic from Fortis BC, which is a great supporter of SFU Co-op. We've worked together on several projects already, and they've been a tremendous support of my software engineering class. So just for quick reference, Sam references a presentation he made at SFU a few years ago. This was a talk that he delivered in my Computing 276 course about software testing. So most of my questions were related to that talk, and so Sam kind of relates back to those slides that he made. I'll also post some of these slides as we go through the interview. He also mentions a person named Keanu, which is a co-op student from SFU who has worked really closely with Sam. Keanu started as a co-op student, but now has developed into a security specialist through his co-op experience. So just in case you're wondering, who is this guy that Sam is referring to? So that said, I hope you enjoy this interview, and let me know if you want to see anything similar to this in the future. All right, let's go. Today, I'm pretty excited. We have Sam on the line here, and he is from Fortis BC. So I think we just want to talk a little bit about testing and some of the challenges that you have, and just to get to know a little bit about you as well as the company that you work for. This is probably a good chance for us to connect because I don't really know much about your company. I know that you work for, you are associated with SFU Co-op, but that's about the extent that I know of the company. So this might be a good opportunity. So how are you today?
Very well, very well. Thanks, Bobby, for having me.
So yeah, let's start off with this. Tell us a little bit about yourself. What's your job title? What are your backgrounds? What's your interests?
Sure. So my job title is the SAP Technical Support Manager here at Fortis BC. For those of you who might know, there's a software out there called SAP that most of the Fortune 500 companies use around the world to basically run their business. Also, if you're a sports fan, you'll see it, I'm sure, marketed somewhere there. So basically, the things that I look after here at Fortis are SAP centric, but there are two groups that kind of fall within me, and that is the system administration type of work and also the security. So those are the two groups that I oversee here at Fortis.
Great. Tell me a little bit about the company because I know about Fortis BC because I get a lot of bills from you guys. But aside from that, can you tell us a little bit about the company, the culture, maybe about the
Sure,
work campus?
sure. Oddly enough, I have to pay BC Hydro, so I, I'm fraternizing with the enemy. But no, I mean, honestly, I was quite pleased when I showed up here. The atmosphere is a little bit more, I would say, calm than what I've been used to. For example, there was a day when I used to work for BlackBerry, and that it was quite hectic. They didn't like cutting edge; they liked bleeding edge over there. Whereas here, things are at a different kind of a pace, and people are very collaborative, um, and they treat everyone with a lot of respect. Is I guess what I would say as well. And you kind of mentioned that the Keanu reference there. So yeah, we did try a new thing out. When was it? 2 years ago, roughly, I think, where we had Keanu come in, and he helped out with covering for a security position that I had while he was on his co-op. It was actually quite an eye-opening experience. He did so well that he kind of ruined it for other folks who had to come in after him because he set the bar so high. So I was very pleased with Keanu as a person and also with his knowledge, which I'm sure some of which has to go back to thanking SFU as well. So yeah, that was it was quite a positive experience that I had with Keanu
Oh,
and with
great.
yourself and SFU in general.
Yeah, I've actually really enjoyed working with Fortis. Everyone there is pretty cool, and yeah, I just enjoy the projects that we've been doing. Okay, well, let's dive right into it. The testing aspect of it. I know that every semester I kind of struggle with this because there's just so much to talk about and there's so many angles to look at it. So maybe we can start with providing an overview. What does overall, what does testing really mean to you?
Uh, and sorry if I keep staring over to the side here because I'm looking at you over on that monitor, and I'm trying to keep my face in front of the video here. Um, Honestly, to me, testing really boils down to confidence. If you want to give it one word, right? Confidence, first of all, for your product, and also confidence in the people who who are going to oversee whatever product it is that you're either creating or changing, right? So that to me is, I think, the one word that encompasses what testing does, right? Um, and I think also one thing to be, I guess, kind of cognizant of is the fact that that testing that you do also builds builds, or can work negatively too, your reputation, right, in the company. So I think that that's one thing that you should always try and keep in mind is that, okay, you go through a project and you execute your testing, but your name is attached to that testing. And when things down the line, when they don't work, it's ultimately going to flow back to, oh well, did person X test that? Because I know here at work, that's exactly what we say, right? When something doesn't work according to what it said it was going to do. So yeah, ultimately it kind of boils down to that. So reputation and confidence.
Yeah, I like that. I like how those two things are kind of linked together as well, right? Like something that you test works really well, that increases your confidence. How would you define testing in your own words?
So way back when I was coming up with the deck for when I did the actual presentation at
Yeah,
SFU,
yeah,
I went online and I was looking at different definitions according to different people, and I kind of created my own version of what I felt was important components from what these different people also had said, right?
mhm.
So, and I think I actually made a slide that had just that. So, but it was something along the lines of the act of evaluating your product, um, and then through this process, you're basically verifying, is it doing what we said it was going to do, right? And how it was going to do it. So that's kind of that's not verbatim, but it's pretty close to, I think, what I came up with on the slide.
Yeah, I think this is something that we're probably going to get into a little bit later, but just understanding your audience and understanding who's going to be using the application, I think, yeah, very important.
It
Um,
is, and I think that those were some of the things that I highlighted over the course of my presentation at SFU the last time. Is that that's one thing you really have to focus on, I think, and a lot of people don't, and they miss out on, I think, crucial information first of all, and also crucial paths that you should take when you're creating your testing script.
yeah, yeah, agreed. So I get this question a lot, especially towards the end of the semester all the time with my students. Because I always kind of stress testing. Okay, every time you go through an iteration of your application, you should test it. You should make sure everything is working fine. But why are we stressing this? Because if your application works, then we should be happy with it, right? So why do you think testing is so crucial to software development in general?
Well, I mean, you want to make it bulletproof, right? Ultimately, and by doing so, you're not only addressing the needs of your target audience and creating that end user experience that you want to create, um, but also you're opening up the doors to potentially expanding what it is that you've done to a larger audience. To where, and what I mean by that is that other groups start using your product, right? So sometimes you have a target audience that, okay, this is what I'm doing and for who. But then, because people of that group start, for example, talking, at the water cooler, so to speak, with other folks, they say, hey, we're using this product, and then all of a sudden these people try it out, and then all of a sudden your target audience just expanded, right? Which,
Mhm.
you know, a lot of times people don't realize that, sometimes what they do, it can actually be, you know, leveraged in more than just the original scope, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah. You mentioned target audience there. I want to dig deeper into that in a second. But
sure.
what just so that we don't leave this general view here, what are the primary goals of testing, do you think?
Um, well, obviously you want to pick up the bugs, right? Um, you want to handle as much performance testing as you can. So performance testing, I think will probably, I know I touched on it in the slide, and we may touch on it a little bit deeper later on, but that's definitely one of the things that you want to evaluate. Um, you want to like you want to really make sure that the product is reliable. And I think also one thing that sometimes slips by is security concerns as well, whether it be cyber or what other whatever whatever other factors the corporation might have, right? But I think really for me, because this is the thought process that I kind of use. I always put myself in the end user's shoes, and I say, okay, when I'm done with this, when they're sitting in front of their laptop or whatever, and they're using this product, how are they going to like start spewing out four-letter words at me, or are they going to say, hey, this is pretty cool?
Yeah. Cool. Yeah. So getting back to the target audience, and I want to expand that a little bit about the stakeholders as well. So in terms of testing, who would you say the main stakeholders are? Like who cares? Who cares about the tests that you're writing?
Sorry, I was laughing because I was thinking back to the slide, and right off the bat, I think I said, "Who cares? Nobody." Or something along those lines. Nobody
Yes.
cares. Yeah. Um, it it all depends. I mean, and I hate saying it all depends because then I sound like I'm back in my days as a consultant. But it depends on what kind of change you're making or what creation you're coming up with. There will be different people at different points in time who will be testing, but their methodology, their interests will vary based on groups. So, for example, if as a developer you're going to think in a certain thought process, if you're a functional person, you will evaluate it with a different lens. If you're a business unit, you're going to again a different lens, and the list goes on and on. Um, it all varies on where you are at in regards to the testing schema.
Yeah, I think that's very important. So you did mention like methodologies, and that's something we'll dive into a little bit later on. But can you explain how maybe different teams within the testing scope have different, or sorry, are maybe responsible for different types of tests, maybe even in your organization?
Sure. I mean, I can give you an example of what happens here with my team and how they kind of interact with the functional teams. So when we go through a change in production, um, usually everybody goes through a set of sanity checks, right? But those sanity checks will vary from team to team. So from my team's perspective, we kind of do a technical sanity check, and then the functional team will come back in and say, okay, we're just going to also do a sanity check, but our sanity check is purely functional. Does this thing do what we think it's going to do? And so they create a script, so to say, of uh, whatever it is they feel is important to use as a sanity check, and then they verify that. So that's how the lens changes. You're all testing, right? But in the end, you're doing different things, right?
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned about methodologies earlier, testing methodologies. How do you determine which testing methodologies would apply to like a given project that you're working on?
Whew. Um, so to come up with a methodology, you have to start, I guess, from without getting into specifics, like in regards to what you're going to test. You have to first start with the change itself. What are you impacting? What is the complexity? What are the integrations that are involved? Who is your end user community? Those are the kinds of things that are going to help you build out what it is that you feel that your testing methodology should be. So there is no cookie cutter answer for
Sure.
what a methodology is, right? You have to base it on those criteria, and I'm sure there's probably a few more that I haven't covered here, but just to give you an idea is that there are several aspects that you have to kind of look at it as you evaluate.
Yeah. So piggybacking off of that idea, the several aspects of it, do you have an example of a project where you had to adjust your testing methodology or approach?
Um, so I recall this was a few years ago. We had worked on a change which was actually nothing that drastic or difficult, what have you. Um, but the the company that we did this change for was very particular about their logo.
Mm.
And what had happened is that depending on what device you were looking at, the logo color was off. And it was off by enough um, that the person who was in charge, uh, I mean, they lost it when they saw that because and it's something that you kind of sometimes don't think about, right? Like, okay, and is the end user going to be using their phone for this application, for example, or are they going to use a laptop, or is it going to be PC or a tablet or whatever. Each of those can potentially give you a different result. So if, again, knowing what your audience is, and that's part of the audience, right, is what mechanism they will use to interact with your product is very important.
Yeah, I think that's very helpful. So I want to dive in a little bit more in terms of the planning of a test. So what are some perspectives, I guess, or angles that you have to look at when you're planning out the tests for a given feature?
So I think I'll touch back on what I think I mentioned earlier is the knowing your end user, right? And thinking along those lines in regards to what you think that person is going to expect, and maybe even taking it a step further, talking with that end user or the end user community and seeing what are their expectations out of this, right? And then through that analysis, I think you can come up with some pretty essential information to help you actually provide a good product in the end.
Yeah, agreed. So how do you ensure that your approach is comprehensive and covers all the necessary aspects of that software?
Well, if you go in with the thought process of trying to look at it from the consumer lens, then I think that will help you ensure that you're addressing at least the end user experience component of it. Now, depending on what type of change you're making, then you also have to start incorporating things, of complexity. So when I say complexity, it could be integration points, for example. Is your software speaking with another software, or is it traversing across some other plane into a different, I don't know, database or a different, user interface or that kind of thing? Those kind of components you have to kind of keep in mind when you're coming up with an approach.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. So let's think, I guess, in terms of the tester themselves, because I think a lot of the students here are just trying to get an idea of when they're actually working in that environment of being a tester, what it actually looks like. And I think there's no, as you say, it's not cookie cutter, right? So everyone is going to have their,
there's no book for this.
Yeah, everyone's going to have their own style, right? And their own techniques and their own, I guess, preferences for testing. So can you talk a little bit about that? How do you adopt your own style for testing?
Well, I think if you knowing yourself, first of all, right? You hopefully have a good understanding of your own strengths and weaknesses, right? Also understanding, as I mentioned earlier, the end user, that will also help you, I think, design your testing approach and style. Those things kind of come into play more almost like on a psychological basis than it is a technical one, right? So I think that's one thing. Try to just use those types of lenses a little bit. Don't just go straight by the book,
right?
So to speak, right?
Yeah.
And that's really what I hope comes out of this discussion, is that I will shed some light, hopefully, on some things that are not going to be on ink and paper, right? And that you take what was taught, and you also sprinkle in a little bit of what I say, because this is what you're going to see in real life, right? And between those two things, you mesh a good overall strategy.
Yeah. So can you give me an example of how you would approach testing based on your preferences?
I'm terrible at remembering things, first of all. So I like to record interviews with people, or areas where, for example, if they're coming up with a requirements meeting, that type of thing. Because for me, I take terrible notes. My handwriting is atrocious. So for me, if I record the meeting, obviously you have to get the approval from everybody to do so. But that to me is one of the things that I do to kind of supplement my weaknesses.
Mm-hmm.
So there you go.
I think that's very important. I mean, even if we're not, if we don't struggle with remembering things, I think it's good to kind of record any interactions we have with our clients, just in case there are some nuances that we miss along the way.
Yeah, and sometimes you might find yourself second guessing what you thought you either remembered or heard.
Yeah.
And then it's always kind of a valuable tool to be able to sit there and go back and go, okay, let me just go verify this just real quick, right? And then once you verified, then you know, okay, yeah, either I was right or I was wrong, but either way, you come up with the proper end result.
Yeah, I think that's a good segue to our next question, which is talking about the end user. So you mentioned this several times already, understanding the end user, and I don't think this is something we think about when we like first get into testing. We think about like we're writing the code and we have to convince ourselves that it's correct. But why is it important to understand our end user?
Well, I can give you kind of a little bit of an example of why. We just recently had an experience where we had a data field which was truncating information. Now, it, in the real world, that data field was used incorrectly because people, human nature, typically, we are lazy. So they found that this field was convenient for them to use as a way of putting in notes, which was fine as long as they didn't exceed 256 characters. Well, as soon as they did, that data was gone, right?
Hmm.
So knowing how your end user thinks and how they anticipate to use the tool, or if they tell you how they're going to use the tool, is even better. Helps you then also check for certain things that you probably wouldn't have thought about had it just been you sitting at a desk thinking, okay, what am I going to come up with for testing?
Hmm. So along those lines, how do you incorporate feedback from the users? Like how do you gather them and how do you use them in a tangible way, like for testing?
Well, I mean, you can one-on-ones I find are the
Hmm.
best. It is time consuming, mind you. But I find the one-on-ones is where you find those golden nuggets of information. You could, for example, send out a poll or a questionnaire, for example, if you had certain areas of questions or concerns. But those are, I think, a couple of ways. You could also have just like a group discovery type of meeting where you say, okay, this is what we're about to embark upon. What do you feel this this end product is going to be, and how are we going to use it? Uh, what are your expectations? Those kinds of things, and then you can kind of plot out, okay, these are the areas that these people are going to focus on. So now I need to try to understand what it is that they could do wrong,
Hmm.
and then come up with a plan according to that in regards to what testing you can try.
Hmm. Okay, that's very interesting. Yeah, I it wouldn't be the first place that I would think about in terms of like if I was just getting started. Yeah. Okay, so we've talked about the tester, we've talked about the user. Let's talk a little bit about our deployment, like the environment that this is going to be in. So how does the environment in which this application is going to be in affect your testing strategy?
Um, Geez, that's a big one. If I recall, I think on even on my slide, I had to reduce the font on all the things I started blurting out on.
And
Uh,
I'll post your slide on this.
yeah, please, that would be great. So um, I think integration. So knowing your landscape, right? Um, Sometimes people think in a very siloed manner, and you can't do that. In particular, if you know that 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 there's tentacles of connectivity between your product and other things or other people. So that integration between either people or hardware, what have you, technology, I think is important to know. Um, let's see what else, and kind of a little bit going, and I'll go back also to that one experience that I had with the logo, knowing what the product is that's going to be used to present your your uh, your end deliverable. I think is very very important. Um, and one other thing too, I think as part of that environment is also to know that you have the proper test data, assuming the data is applicable, I guess, for
Mhm.
your testing needs. I find, for example, here in our development environment, we don't have quite the necessary data, like relevant data, up to date data,
Mhm.
to assist a developer and that initial testing phase. to say, okay, I'm confident with pushing this over into queue for now the next stage of people to carry on with their testing. So I think that's also one thing that needs to be kept in mind is, do you have relevant either data or examples or that kind of thing to use for your own purpose of testing?
Yeah. So you mentioned a lot of factors there. Do you?
And there's more.
Yeah. Do you off the top of your head, do you remember an example where you had to adjust your tests based on some environmental factors or something that was not consistent in your environment?
Um, I can give you a recent one where we needed to do testing, and this now we're talking about the integration thing again,
Hmm.
and not all of the other applications were ready for testing. So now the testing script that we had laid out had to be kind of parsed up and then reviewed again at a later point in time, because since the applications weren't ready at that time, we had to delay that testing. So now then you have to decide, okay, the testing that I can do, is it still relevant when I do it without these applications, or do I need to hold off on it altogether, or create a scaled down version of my testing?
Mhm.
That's probably the most recent example I have.
Hmm. Okay, good. Um, all right, I want to switch gears a little bit, going back to talking about planning and setting out goals for planning. So, how do you write goals? I mean, I'm kind of having trouble formulating this in my mind, but what are the key goals you set for testing a project?
Um, well, I think one thing to always keep in mind, it's almost inevitable that your project scope is going to creep. So you want to first of all be mentally flexible enough to accept that, because it will happen. But also flexible enough in your approach to say, okay, this is how you adapt and overcome whatever that change was. That was my Clint Eastwood reference, by the way, for anybody old enough to know who the hell
Nope,
Clint Eastwood is.
nope. Even I didn't get that, and I don't think any
Oh,
of my students will get
oh,
that.
okay. I feel so old. Okay. Um, but so that first of all, know that there will be scope creep, is one thing. But there are other things in knowing your goal in regards to, okay, uh, are the things that I'm doing, are they qualitative? Are they quantitative? Um, and how do you get a clear uh, approval rating for each one? Uh, Quantitative, I think, obviously is naturally easier. Qualitative, that's where sometimes it's a little bit of an art in regards to saying, okay, this is a pass and this is not. So that's one of the things. Another goal that I always have is to come up with real life test cases. So knowing, again, going back to, I keep going back on knowing the end user and stuff like that, knowing how they're going to use it is a way of saying, okay, my goal is I want them to be able to do that. And then you kind of work backwards from that to create your test.
Would you say qualitative is a little bit more manual? Would would those things be related, or maybe not?
It's it can be. It can be. Well, like for example, for that logo, the color. Okay. So now, is my close enough the same as your close enough for that color?
Sure. Yeah.
Probably
Yeah.
not,
Yeah.
right? So that's when it becomes, a little bit more of a subjective thing. And that once you get subjective, then that's a whole new ballgame right there.
Yeah. So how do you ensure that there's these clear communication of these goals within your team?
A lot of documentation.
Mm.
I think you need to have from the project leads. I think you need to have clear marching orders with that. So if you don't have good set of ground rules right from the start, then it's easy to stray, right?
Mhm.
And if you do find that there's a hazy area of decision making, then you need to clarify that with whoever it is that's in charge immediately.
Mhm.
Because otherwise, if you leave it hazy, then it gets back to subjective, right? It was good enough for me, but not good enough for person X. So you get into a lot of problems that way.
Yeah, so you just answered my next question, which is
Oh,
like why
sorry.
why no no which is good because that's where I was kind of headed. Um, so documentation, yeah, very important in testing. Do you have some strategies that you would use to ensure that you have thorough documentation? Like, is there like a structure that you typically use, or what can you tell us about like good documentation?
So a lot of times, if you walk into, for example, a company that is mature with their testing, there will already be templates basically waiting for you,
Mhm.
and basically you just kind of you populate the fields as you see necessary. And I think I put in my slide deck an example of that.
Mhm.
But having an agreed upon format, I think is important. Even something as simple as where you store it, because so many times you're going to have somebody, well, they'll put it on their C drive and poof, it's gone. Like nobody ever sees it again, right? And then that person leaves the company, and well, there you go. It's history. Um, the documentation should also bear in mind who will be looking at it. So it's not just going to be, you and potentially another tester with you. It could be somebody from management. It could be somebody from audit, right? Audit is a big one. So it could be a big one because depending on what kind of company you work for, there could be a lot of regulations in place
Mm.
for your documentation so that you have to meet certain criteria before that product goes live.
Does
And
Fortis
for,
have a
for the
lot of
product,
those?
I would say we're not that mature. Um, we do have some. Not to say that we don't have any, but I've seen places that is a lot more robust in regards to their requirements. Whether it be the format, where it's located, um, having for example, even peer reviews of your document prior to it even getting to the point of being evaluated. You can take it to all kinds of extremes when it comes to that. But again, it just boils down to where you're working at that time, and
Hmm.
they'll set those criteria.
Yeah. Well, this is really interesting. I thank you again for your time. But is there any additional points or maybe best practices that you can think of? Because I think a lot of the students here are, I think they will likely be testing in their first co-op, but are there any like best practices that you can talk about or things to remember for testing?
I would say if to kind of evaluate your work, if you can pick somebody who's not involved with your project, present them your testing ideas, and if it makes sense to them, if your documentation makes sense to them, then I think you're really on the right track. Okay, because you don't know, again, as I was mentioning earlier, you don't know who at whatever point in time is going to be looking at your documentation, either to evaluate it or to evaluate you. It all is a matter of being clear and concise in what your documents are trying to convey, right? Um, having tools that uh, have built-in documentation with it also kind of helps. So, for example, like a Jira, for example, if you have uh, you know the problem findings, then you have a centralized place for okay, this is now a bug, we have to address it, and then that bug in the end alters your testing script, right? Because you obviously, or I won't say obviously, you probably didn't account for that bug in your testing. So now you have to incorporate an additional step or steps to cover that bug.
Yeah, yeah, I think that was very important. What I'm taking away from all of this is that it's not I don't want to say I don't use the word informal, but there's no like strict procedure associated with like how you're going to run a test like, within any company. So that said, I'm interested. Are there any horror stories that you can share with me? Can you share an example of something that was very challenging in terms of a testing scenario that and perhaps how you addressed it?
Um, not too far off in the past here, we we did a patch where the uh, sorry, we did an upgrade where patch versions were kind of all over the place across the corporation. Um, the, the variance in those patches created different testing results. So then it was kind of difficult to say, okay, what is the final result going to actually look like, right? So you could not say for 100% this is expected to work and that's expected to work. So what ended up being the resolution was that we being this now included the management team as well, agreed upon certain risks with the end result, knowing that because some of those patch levels in were so far out of date that and the number of accounts were so small that we accepted the risk of whatever those minor deficiencies were. That was personally something that, just because of my personality, I had a hard time swallowing, because I don't like releasing something that I know is going to have that won't have the results that I was expecting for everybody.
Yeah, it almost sounded like you're going backwards at that stage, right? You're working backwards.
It was, and it was something that I had to kind of come to terms with. I mean, in the end, it didn't turn out as bad as what I had pictured in my head. But sometimes, there are some things that whether you found it through testing or not, there are sometimes things that just don't get fixed right away. Mm-hmm. And that's when, the different iterations that come afterwards hopefully address the product at that point.
Yeah, I think that's also a good example of how like your personality plays in with the testing as well, right? Like your level of comfort with like what you're doing. Well, yeah, this is all really interesting theory. So you also sent us an example of a test, or just, I guess, a documentation of a test. I'm showing it on the screen right now, and I know you can't see it, but can you walk us through this? This is a real world example of a testing scenario.
So let's see. Is that first slide that I?
Yeah, this is the slide that you sent me.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So pardon me as I'm staring over here at my
no
other
problem.
monitor. So yeah, basically this is what I was talking about when I mentioned the templates. So as you can see here, there's a pre-formatted page that you basically will go through and identify various types of information, right? Mm-hmm. What I normally try to incorporate, and I think a lot of people also do, not just myself, is you try to do things to make things easier for the person who's reading this document, right? So don't just be very binary and like, here it is, it's good, bad, this is what you do, click on that, blah blah blah. Do the extra steps. Give them some tips and tricks, or some hints on how you can do this test, or what to expect, or things along that nature, things that will give them additional information, not just the black and white, so to speak, of text, right? Knowing how to use clear and concise wording is, I think, also very important, because usually they don't give you a lot of room on these forms. I mean, without creating, war and peace out of a document. So knowing how to be clear and concise is critical, I think, in identifying what it is that you're doing, what are you expecting, and what are the results.
Yeah, I think the screenshots really help as well in terms of not being black and white.
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, it kind of gives, to go to a little bit of the psychology of it, right? It kind of puts you in a different mindset as well when you're looking at these documents, instead of just this plain document. If you give it a little bit of color, right, it gives it a little bit of life, and then it kind of gives you a little bit of life when you're looking at it, rather than if you're just looking at, like a newspaper for the old days, where it was pure, just ink and paper. You have a completely different perspective of what you're looking at when it gives it a little bit of vibrance, right?
Yeah. Well, thank you for this. This is very helpful. I hope the students are getting a lot from what we're discussing here. I hope this is not too high level. I'm giving enough examples to kind of show what's happening here. But do you have any final thoughts for, let's say I'm a student and going into co-op, perhaps, looking maybe at a testing job or something like that. Do you have any advice for someone entering the field?
Yeah, first and foremost, don't expect to be an expert right off the bat. No. it ain't gonna happen. That takes years of experience and multiple projects before you get even to the point of I'll call it comfort. Um, and I've heard this term used now for the last few years, but fail fast. So if something's gonna go wrong, try to identify it quickly, right? So you keep that kind of like in the back of your head when you are running your tests. If there is something which kind of makes you raise a Spockian eyebrow, then kind of look into it and see, because more than likely where there's smoke, there's fire. And if you see that all of a sudden, hold on a second, this is a showstopper, right? Then it's much better to go back to the project team, the management team, and say, oh, folks, this is not good in the early stages, than 2 weeks before go live,
Mm.
right? So that, and I think the other thing that I would say is don't use a one size fits all approach. So as you were saying, that cookie cutter, that doesn't work either. Every piece of work that you do will have its own signature. It will have its own outline and its own body of work. So don't think that just because, okay, my last project, yeah, that worked really well, I'm going to use that same.
Mm.
You basically have to kind of start from scratch, but use the experience to help you build out that new approach.
Yeah, I think that's an important theme. I think we touched on it several times today. To just don't stick to one algorithm, right? To approach your testing.
I think that's a recipe for failure if you do.
Well, as I said, this has been very helpful. Do you have a few minutes to answer some questions from the students?
Absolutely.
All right, cool. So a lot of these questions are about co-op because I think that's at most of the students that I'm recording this for. That's the stage that they're in. So, what co-op positions do you hire at Fortis?
So I have seen in engineering, there were some, and this I only know because I'm part of the hiring process
Mhm.
with, so the onboarding also includes an SAP account. So sometimes I see these come across the line here. But we do have like engineering students. There are students in on the help desk. There are um, Tim, my colleague here, who he also had hired on a co-op, who is now a contractor for us, to help him with some web work. And for example, as we spoke about earlier on, have hired Keanu, and actually I was actually in contact with him just last week about potentially maybe doing some more work together. So uh, there's various teams that you could end up with at Fortis. Now, other companies I'm sure would have something similar. Um, but yeah, I guess it all depends on what field specifically you want to try and get into.
Yeah. Would you say testing is one of the earlier things that you would give co-op students?
Uh, I wouldn't give it to them as them being the sole person
Right.
doing it. I would definitely include them in a team of testers for sure,
Hmm.
because I think one thing that I've learned from having a co-op here is that you have a person with a different perspective, and that's always beneficial.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. Is there any advice you could give to students that are applying to co-op for the first time? Anything to include in their portfolio, or what do you look for specifically?
Hmm. Wow, that's a tough one. I mean, for me, I guess it all depends on what level of difficulty the position is that I'd be looking to fill. For me in particular, I was looking for basically a junior security person. So I went in knowing that this person was going to need training, um, a lot of guidance, and some hand holding in the beginning. I was fortunate enough to have Ganu with me, who really whizzed through that. The learning curve was very short. Um, but I mean, there could be, you know, things. If, for example, if I'm looking at a resume, obviously you want somebody with a reflective background. You don't necessarily have to have specific background, because obviously as a co-op, people know you're still learning. You haven't had a chance to really be out in the field.
Mhm.
So they have that. I would hope they would have that understanding that the expectation, it, the, and the bar is set at a different level with hiring a co-op, right?
Yeah,
So
that was
I
actually related to one of the other questions that I got here,
oh,
no, no, this is really
okay.
good. But yeah, do you usually accept co-ops without much experience? And
With Canada
yeah,
has
so
zero
what
experience.
level of experience do you look for?
Well, I'll go back to my comment about depending on what it is you're looking for. For
Mm.
me, I went into it knowing that I was going to have somebody from starting from ground zero. So my expectations of experience were also zero, right? But obviously, him having a background in computers gives him at least that foundation of understanding that then allows me to say, okay, yeah, he at least he understands concepts that I'm going to be presenting to him. So then teaching him the concepts is usually not that big of a deal.
Right, right.
Now, I mean, if you're, I don't know, a psychology major and you want to get into, a co-op for engineering, you know what I mean? Then it kind of they don't line up that well, right? But if what you're doing at school is relevant to what it is you're applying for, then I think the people who are doing the hiring know full well of what to expect.
Yeah. So getting back to the culture, I guess, of the company. For most co-ops, do they come into the office a lot, or is it mostly remote work? How does that shape up?
So the going to the office part will depend on the company that you are going to work for. Each company has their own working from home policy.
Mm.
Um, for example, with me, we have a 2 days from home policy. So in the early days, I had Keanu come in every day, um, primarily just for the mentorship, the guidance in going through all the documentation to understand what these processes are, the company policies. Those things which are company specific, I think are some things that are best learned kind of face to face with people. I'm not against people working from home at all. I personally I don't.
Mm.
But if my team, for example, worked 5 days a week from home, it wouldn't hurt my feelings at all.
Okay. Well, I think yeah, those are all the questions I have. Again, I really thank you for your time, for spending so much time with us
Yeah,
today.
no worries, Bobby.
Um, do you have any way that we can get in touch with you? Do you have a social media or email that you can share with us?
I think you have my email address, and so all the hate mail and death threats can come to that one. If you want, I can blurt it out here. Um,
No, I can flash it on the
okay,
screen here.
yeah, go for it.
Okay. Well,
I
again,
think that
thank you
that would
so
be the best
much.
way, and anybody can reach out with any questions that you may have. That's not a problem at all.
Okay. Thank you so much, Sam. Really
All right, Bobby.
appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
See you, everybody.